Welcome to our video lecture today. Today we're going to be talking about raising rabbits. Well, we won't really talk about them right now. We'll talk about them later. First, we're going to talk about how a program deals with data. In almost every program that you ever write, there are going to be two things that are going on. You're going to be keeping track of data, and you're going to be processing it and working it through a flow. Java really has two different kinds of data. It has primitives and it has objects. Let's talk about them a little more. So a computer organizes its memory into what we call, they're kind of like mailboxes. When you're writing your program, sometimes you just need a temporary place to store some data. Well, we store temporary data in things called variables in programming. Think of a variable kind of like a mailbox. Have you ever been to the post office? At the post office, there is this vast wall of mailboxes. And if you look a little closer at them, you'll notice that they all have a number on them. And they're different sizes. There are really small ones that only a couple of envelopes can fit into, all the way to huge ones that great big packages could fit into. Variables are kind of like this. Each variable has a name that's kind of like the number on a mailbox. It has a type that's a little bit like the size of a mailbox. And if you open up that mailbox there at the post office, there might just be a letter in it. Well, a variable has a value associated with it. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the types of variables. There are objects. Objects, we kind of treat all objects the same, even though they're all different shapes and sizes. And then there are primitives. Primitives are simple things that we use to store data. There are integers and real numbers and Boolean, that's true and false, and strings and characters. There's all sorts. And there are wrapper classes. We won't talk about them much here. But a wrapper class is basically a way to take a primitive and to make it a class or an object. Now the size of these variables, primitives specifically, vary a lot. And you can see in this table how different primitives have different lengths and support different kinds of data. If you look at an integer, for instance, right in the middle, that's an int, it's stored in 32 bits. And it stores a value from negative 21 billion to positive 21 billion. That's a pretty big number. But if you look down at a double, it stores a much, much bigger number. Well, we're going to walk through an example of using variables. Now that you know the concept, let's put this to use. First, we'll use Scratch, and then we'll use Java. I'm going to be demonstrating how to use a variable first using Scratch. So I've already gone to Scratch at scratch.mit.edu. I've already logged in. And now I'm going to go to Create to begin writing my script. Now what we want to be able to do is to ask the user to enter a number, capture the number, do a calculation on the number, and then output the number to the screen. So the first thing that we need to do is ask for a number. And so under sensing, there's an element that's called ask what your name is and wait. And we're going to change the question here by double clicking in here and say enter a number. Okay. Now the way that Scratch works is it's going to take the number that it gets and it's going to put it in a temporary storage place like a variable called answer. So you need to know that up front. But then for us to be able to do some operations on it, we're going to take answer, we're going to put it in a variable of our own, and then we're going to do our calculations. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a variable. And so if you go to the data section, we can make a variable. And we can call this thing whatever we want. I'm just going to call it my variable, just so it's easy. And I'm going to click OK. And you'll notice that some elements show up here for us to use. The first one is this set my variable to with a little box. Okay, I'm going to drag that up here and I'm going to attach it. And then I'm going to go back to sensing. And I'm going to take the answer. See this little guy here called answer? And I'm going to dump him right in there. See how it highlights? So what we've just done is we've asked the user for a number, and then we've taken the answer to that question and put it in this new variable that we just created, set variable to answer. Okay. Now we can do some pretty sophisticated things with this now. Like for instance, if we go to operations, I'm just going to drag this plus tile out here. I'm going to go back to data and set variable. I'm going to drag him back in there again. Now I'm going to put this plus, I'm going to drag this plus green guy over in there, and I'm going to drag my variable and put it in here. Oops, went in the wrong spot. There we go. And then in here I'm going to put 10. And then the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to look, and I'm going to show and come back to variable, say my variable. All right, so my script asks the user for a number, takes that number and puts it into the variable we just created, called my variable. Then it takes my variable plus 10 and puts it back into the same variable. This is actually a pretty common thing that we'll do in programming, and we'll show you that. And then the last is it displays the results. So there's only one other thing that we need to do. We need to add the when the green flag is clicked. Now we can show it. So all this is going to happen to this little sprite over here. So when I click the green flag, notice down here at the bottom, we put in a number. Let's put in the number 10. Hit enter and see how it displays 20. So that is the most basic, or one of the most basic scripts that you can write. And I hope that this will get you started and thinking about the way we deal with variables. You've seen it in Scratch. Now let's see what it looks like in Java. I've already shown you how to create a simple script using Scratch that deals with variables. Now we're going to do the same thing using Java. So here we are with NetBeans, and we're going to right-click over on the package, go to New, and create a Java class. I'd like to create this call this Java class variables, and click Finish. And now, as we can see, NetBeans has created us a class to use. Okay, now we'll use this class to start our program. Now we're going to write this as a procedural program. And what I mean by that is that it's not really going to be object oriented, but that's because of the simplicity of what I'm trying to show you here. I don't think that it needs to be. So we'll go through this. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to create a main. Public static void main. Just about every program is going to start with something like this. Okay. Just like in our script, let's go through the requirements. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to ask user for input of a number. Then we are going to store the number. We're going to perform calculation on the number, and we're going to display the number. Okay. The first thing has to do with asking the user input. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to ask the question. What did we say? Enter. Whoops. Can't type today. Enter a number. Okay. Okay, the next thing that we need to do gets a little bit more tricky. In fact, it's quite a bit more tricky than what we did in Scratch, because we need to use an already defined class and create an object from it. So there's a class out there, and I'm going to add it up here. It's called Scanner. And you can just kind of copy this. Now you notice that Scanner over here it's complaining. That's because it doesn't know where to find it. So up here under package, we're going to import and you notice as soon as we put this java.util.asterisk line, import line, this became better. Okay. Now we're gonna do something a little bit different with the storing of the variable. The first thing is we're going to create a variable because we're going to store a number. Let's make it an int. We're going to call it my variable. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use this object we created called input. We created it up here, and we're going to get the next int right off of the keyboard. And that what will happen here is we'll get the input off the keyboard and we'll store it in my variable at the same time that we're creating my variable. I know that's a little hard to understand. So we now have a variable, my variable, that has a value in it. So the next thing we want to do, so storing the number, I'm just going to move that up here because basically you do both of these at the same time. Now, let's perform our calculation. We're going to do the same thing we did with Scratch. My variable equals my variable plus 10. So kind of a little bit different than the way we did it with Scratch, but the same result. And so this takes the assignment. Anything that's on the left of the equal sign is what it is that we're setting. And anything on the right is what we're calculating to set it. So that's how we get my variable. Now the last thing that we need to do is display my variable. So this is our simple program. I'm going to right click here and run the program, which compiles it and runs it. Enter a number. I'm going to give it 10 just like we did in Scratch. Hit enter, and the results you can see here is 20. Very similar.